In our daily devotion today, I want to share Matthew 6:33 with you. Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. And I want to tell you a story that illustrates the essence of this verse. Now, one day, a renowned professor was invited to lecture on the topic of efficient time management in a Bible college. Standing in front of this group of eager students who were willing to write down every word that would come out of the famous professor's mouth, the professor slowly announced, "We are going to conduct an experiment." From under the table that stood between the professor and the listeners, the professor pulled out a big glass jar and gently placed it in front of him. Next, he pulled out from under the table a bag of stones, each the size of a tennis ball, and placed the stones one by one in the jar. He did so until there was no room to add another stone in the jar. Lifting his gaze to the students, the professor asked, "Is the jar full?" The students confidently replied, "Yes." The professor paused for a moment and asked, "Really?" Once again, he reached under the table and pulled out a bag full of pebbles. Carefully, the professor poured the pebbles in and slowly rattled the jar, allowing the pebbles to slip through the larger stones till they settled at the bottom. Once again, the professor looked at his audience and asked, "Is the jar full?" At this point, the students were not so confident to answer, and one of them replied, "Apparently not." "Correct," replied the professor, now pulling out a bag of sand from under the table. Cautiously, the professor poured the sand into the jar. The sand now filled up the spaces between the stones and the pebbles. Yet again, the professor asked, "Is the jar full?" Without hesitation, the entire group of students replied in unison, "No!" "Correct," replied the professor. And as was expected by the students, the professor reached for a jar of water that was already on the table and poured water in the jar till it was absolutely full. The professor now lifted his gaze once again and asked, "What great truth can we conclude from this experiment?" With his thoughts on the lecture topic of efficient time management, one student quickly replied, "We learn that as full as our schedules may appear, if we only increase our effort, it is always possible to add more meetings and more tasks." "No," replied the professor. "The great truth that we can conclude from this experiment is, if we don't put all the larger stones in the jar first, we will never be able to fit all of them in later on." The auditorium fell silent as every student processed the significance of what the professor had just said. The professor continued, "What are the large stones in your life? God? Career? Health? Family? Friends? Your goals? Doing what you love? What we must remember is that it is most important to include the larger stones in our lives, because if we don't do so, we are likely to miss out on life altogether. Now, this story illustrates clearly that if we give priority to the smaller things in life, the pebbles, the sand, our lives will be filled up with less important things, leaving little or no time for the things in our lives that are most important to us. So, what are the large stones in your life? Jesus highlighted to us in Matthew 6:33 that the larger stones in our lives are God's kingdom and His righteousness, not what food or drink we will consume or what clothes we will wear. During this circuit breaker period, God is indeed helping us to distill the essentials in our lives, like staying tuned in to our online church and also staying connected with a community of believers in a cell group, so that together we can encourage one another to seek and to do the first things first. God bless you.